Guys, JD King here, filmmaker of Blue. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy the film and also find it informative and that it motivates you to stand up and make a difference in this country when it comes to overreaching environmentalism. Just popping in to say, hey, please check out a Kickstarter campaign we're doing right now. We're trying to raise funds for our next film. It's called Vice Bear. It's about the ice bear, the polar bear, that's been used and abused by climate change alarmists for years. But they've gotten the whole story wrong. They've gotten the facts backwards. And if they can't get this right, why should we trust them with anything else? That's kind of the gist of the campaign. We're going to be running it for 60 days starting today. So please check it out and consider supporting us. Thank you so much. I want the best and the most beautiful and the most thriving world that anybody's ever seen. I want to live in the freest country that anybody's ever experienced, in the most prosperous place that could ever be imagined. And I hope that 100 years from now, the environment that we live in, the freedom that we enjoy, and the prosperity that we've had will be nothing compared to what future generations will see. But I'm afraid that the solutions that our culture has about climate change and environmentalism and the green movement are answers that will not take us to where we want to go. I'm convinced that the ideas underneath the green movement, that its true motives threaten freedom, they jeopardize prosperity, and they limit the potential that we have to truly build a better, more beautiful world. I believe that there's a better way. And that's what this film is about. My name is JD King, and I'm on a mission to save the Earth. I'm going to be exploring how environmentalism has negatively impacted our world and the people who live here by talking with leading experts and scientists who disagree with the status quo. I'll also be meeting with average Americans whose lives have been affected by the green movement. As a Christian, I believe we were created to be stewards and managers of the Earth. Growing up in Montana is probably what gave me my passion for the environment. This is my second film on the subject.
If you have a basically misanthropic worldview, if you see human beings as basically consumers and polluters, as a bad thing, as cancer, as a virus, as people pollution, right? If that's your view of people, then you want to see fewer people and you want to see them not thriving but just barely subsisting, because you think that their numbers and their prosperity are a harm to the earth.
I met up with Calvin Beisner, the founder and national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. One of his biggest concerns is that green doesn't care enough about human prosperity and freedom.
What history tells us is that as people prosper more and more, they take better and better care of the environment. You know, if you're worried about putting food on the table, clothes on the back, and a roof over the head, you really don't care about smog. You don't care about chemical runoff into the streams. Environmentalism gets the whole thing backward. It thinks that people are better off if they're poor, and in reality they're better off if they're wealthy, but so is the environment.
Forget the studies for a second, look at the world. You know, where folks have the resources to protect the environment and improve the environment, they do. You know, the environment in richer countries is better than the environment in poorer countries. You know, where folks have to rely on things like burning wood or subsistence farming, the environment suffers. Again, it's not a hypothetical, it's not a study. Anybody who's been outside the developed world can tell you that with their own eyes, right?
I met Mike McKenna when he was touring the country as a spokesperson for the American Energy Alliance. The sides of his bus were covered in hundreds of signatures from people demanding less of green and more prosperity.
If you think that we can't deploy our energy resources in an environmentally responsible way, that's ridiculous. Because every day in every way we do that. And every day in every way we're getting better at it. And to imagine that the world is like it was in the 19th century, you're just not paying any attention.
Green says that wealth creation is a bad thing for the planet. But the truth that I'm discovering indicates that it's actually one of the best possible things we can do for the environment because it gives us the resources that we need to improve the planet in the best way possible. Green also does not understand that energy production brings wealth, and with that comes something this country desperately needs: jobs.
There's no doubt that the more you produce, the more energy you produce, you're going to encourage the manufacturing sector, right? If you think about oil and gas, right? Every job in the oil and gas sector leads to 3.5 jobs on the outside. Every manufacturing job leads to 5 jobs outside the fence line. So, there's no doubt in my mind that if you make oil and gas more readily available, more reliable, less expensive, you're going to have more economic growth. No doubt.
It's simple. A clean, healthful, beautiful environment is a costly good. Wealthy people can afford more costly goods than poor people can.
So what about all the big corporations, the big evil corporations that are raping and pillaging the planet at the expense of all the rest of us?
You know what? That does occur. But the question we need to be asking is, compared to what? And what are the alternatives? Okay. First of all, governments have far and away the worst environmental records. Corporations don't come close to what governments do to their environments. The Soviet Union's near destruction of Lake Baikal by reversing the flow of some rivers brought on environmental disaster that outdoes anything that's ever happened in the Western world. Much of what China has done, for instance, with the damming of the Yangtze River, has done similar things. Governments are far more destructive of the environment than corporations. And so what? We want to give government more power to do more destruction of the environment? The healthiest forests in North America are those forests that are privately owned. The least healthy forests, the ones where you'll get these massive forest fires that break out, are the ones that are owned by the U.S. Forest Service.
One problem that people have when they think about these issues is that they don't have a very good long-term historical grasp of things. And so people don't think about, for example, that 110 years ago, at the beginning of the 20th century, the predominant mode of transportation in our cities was horses. Now, the average horse ate something like 30 pounds of feed a day, and you can imagine the amount of manure and urine that was produced. 100,000 horses in New York City, you can imagine what it smelled like. And in fact, the public health authorities at the time said this is a real health problem. Until we get rid of horses and bring in automobiles and something motorized, public health is going to suffer. And in fact, respiratory disease rates in American cities were 8 times higher 100 years ago than they are today. And so the irony is that the automobile ended up being an environmental improvement for our cities. They actually cleaned up the cities.
In early stages of a society moving from basically agrarian system, agrarian society, to an industrialized society, you have a great increase in pollution emissions. And that seems bad from an environmental perspective, but the wealth that is brought about by that enhances human life so much that lifespans increase, death rates decrease, especially infant and child mortality fall very quickly. And then as people get wealthier, they can afford then to clean up the pollution emissions, to prevent the pollution emissions, and you wind up with pollution peaking and then falling off, and you wind up with a cleaner environment after development than before development.
So here's a shocking statistic. If you parked a 1970 Mustang in your driveway and then went to the dealer and bought a brand new 2013 Ford Mustang today and drove it down the highway at 50 miles an hour or any speed, guess which one of those Mustangs would be emitting more air pollution? It would be the one parked in your driveway from 1970. And so it's astounding. I mean, the reduction in what we call tailpipe emissions, the bad stuff coming out the back end of the car, is down, in some cases, 99.9% from 30 years ago.
Environmentalism, because it sees people as consumers and polluters, doesn't understand that economic development is actually the best friend of environmental stewardship.
So one of the reasons that forests have come back in the United States, especially in the east and northeast, is we're not using all that land to grow feed for horses anymore. So the automobile led directly to the conservation of tens of millions of acres of farmland in this country. The other thing about 100 years ago is we got almost a third of our energy, total energy, from burning wood. That's another reason we cut down a lot of trees, is you're heating yourself with wood. Now, wood is sort of a renewable resource because it grows back. On the other hand, when you're cutting down the trees faster than they can grow, which is what was happening, you start running out of trees. That's what led Theodore Roosevelt to predict a timber famine in the country in, I think, 1901 or 1902. In another important respect, the development of oil and natural gas and fuel oil and coal, for that matter, to replace wood as an energy source, led also directly to the restoration of American forests.
But even if switching to fossil fuels helped clean up the cities and reduced health problems, we're told now that it's causing a crisis.
Greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide trap heat. Burning fossil fuels release those gases into the air.
Man-made global warming pollution causes global warming.
The sea will turn to like a jello, the sky will turn green, and we'll be dead.
There are many scientists who disagree with the assertion that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. In fact, many are saying that it's actually making our world greener. One such scientist is Leighton Stewart, the founder of PlantsNeedCO2.org. His views on climate change and carbon dioxide have changed dramatically since he began to critically look at the issue for himself.
When I started this 7 years ago, I was on the other side. I assumed CO2 was the big problem.
You've come 180 degrees.
I've come 180 degrees.
Wow.
The CO2 level in Earth's atmosphere used to be 7,000 parts per million. You and I are breathing only 390 right now. And because I'm a geologist, because I'm accustomed to looking back to see what's happened to Earth over the past years to understand why it's like it is today, I have gone and taken the same approach on climate change and tried to see what this relationship has been in Earth's past climate. And the empirical evidence just does not back up these catastrophic warming forecasts. This graph right here shows you 2,000 years of Earth's history. Earth was actually somewhat warmer during the medieval warm period, as you can see, than it is now. But right here, at the year 1715, is when Earth started its current warming trend and came up through here. Yet man only started putting CO2 in the atmosphere 150 years ago. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand this. And then when you see that Earth had cooled for 500 years, even though the red line, which is CO2 level, was not changing. How did it cool for 500 years? No influence from CO2. How did it warm for 500 years here with no influence from CO2? If CO2 was supposed to be the big driver of climate change. The age-old test of a hypothesis is, will the hypothesis stand up to real observations? And CO2 flunks that test.
Leighton Stewart is not alone in his assessment of carbon dioxide. There are other scientists out there, including Robert Zubrin. He has degrees in aeronautics and astronautics and a PhD in nuclear engineering. He calls those who promote the idea of catastrophic man-made climate change anti-human because they often overlook the plight of the world's poor.
CO2, you're saying, is not something we should be that concerned about.
The anti-humanists had a stronger argument in the 70s because a global cooling trend would have been harmful. Global cooling shortens the growing season. It would have limited food production and so forth. Warming trends are always good for humanity, good for the biosphere. They lengthen the growing season. They increase net rainfall worldwide. And CO2-driven global warming is the best of all because it not only lengthens the growing season and increases rainfall, and incidentally makes the world's climate more mild, okay, it accelerates plant growth. CO2 is the essential limiting ingredient for plant growth. We've had, since 1958, we have had photographs of the Earth taken from orbit. And what they show is over this period of time, during which time the world's atmospheric CO2 concentration did increase by 19%, the rate of plant growth on Earth increased by 15%. Okay, I'm not talking here about agricultural plants. Those have done much better because of the advance of agricultural technology. I'm talking about wild plants, jungles, forests, grasslands. These have grown faster because CO2 is more plentiful. And there's no doubt about the causality here because you can reproduce this experiment in the lab, and people have done so. If you increase the CO2 concentration, plants are going to grow faster. What we're doing is we're making the Earth a more fertile world. And yet the anti-humanists say, well, this is horrible. You must put a stop to it. If CO2 levels in the atmosphere were decreasing as a result of human activity, then they would have a case. But in fact, we're increasing it. We're making the world more fertile. And yet they still say it's wrong.
I know the science, but not many people look at the theological aspects of this. Would we think that an architect who designed a building so that if you leaned on a wall, all of the structure of that building would magnify the stress created by your leaning on that wall so that the building collapsed? Would we think that that architect was brilliant? No, we'd think he was a fool, right? Global warming alarmism says that doubling CO2 concentration in the atmosphere could lead to catastrophic warming. Now, when you talk about doubling CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, that sounds pretty significant. Doubling, wow, twice as much, you know? But the reality is you're doubling it from 27 thousandths of 1% to 54 thousandths of 1%. Who in his right mind thinks that taking CO2 from 24 thousandths of a percent to 54 thousandths of a percent is going to cause climate catastrophe? Only somebody who does not believe that an infinite God designed, an omnipotent God created, and a faithful God sustains the climate system.
What people are really overlooking here, and this is where the true environmentalists are on the wrong side of this issue, and they don't even know it, because the media is not telling them both sides of this issue. Carbon dioxide is the staff of life. We all learned in the 3rd grade that's what plants eat. Plants eat carbon dioxide. The more carbon dioxide you feed them, the more robustly they grow.
Would it be accurate to say if you switch to a bigger truck or a bigger van, you'd be helping the environment more than if you switch to a Prius?
As long as they can clean up all the other bad things that come out of the exhaust, there's nothing wrong with putting CO2 in the atmosphere.
Despite of the fact that the empirical evidence shows that carbon dioxide is not a pollutant that's causing catastrophic climate change, Green still insists that it is. But one must wonder why.
None of this makes sense unless you realize that what they are trying to do is, first of all, to wreck the West and shut it down from within by environmental regulation in a manner that they couldn't do by the communism of the Soviet Union.
Known as the High Priest of Climate Skepticism, Lord Christopher Monckton was my next interview.
So there's an enormous funding bias in science caused by the fact that science is what we economists call a monopsony.
Well, Christopher Monckton is regarded as one of the world's leading skeptics on the issue.
He is extremely disliked by the global climate change community. In fact, he's been kicked out of a UN conference in Doha, and an Austrian professor actually wanted him executed for daring to question the legitimacy of climate science.
The warming must be happening. Maybe it's going and hiding in the sea, and it's going to come out over that parapet and say, boo, here we are, in a few years' time. They have clambered on to this global warming bandwagon just at the moment when all the wheels have fallen off. So they're going nowhere with it. And everybody can see, except themselves, that they're going nowhere with it. The West is deeply resented even by many of its own citizens because of its cheerfulness, its success, its prosperity, its freedom, and its democracy. And those who like to see themselves as a part of a wiser governing class that knows better than we do how we ought to live our lives hate the fact that the cheerful chaos of democracy leads to such extraordinary prosperity. They hate it, they resent it bitterly, they want to stop it. They have discovered the environment as the way to stop this.
In the 1970s, there was a global cooling going on, natural global cooling. And the anti-humanists then said, look, there's global cooling. It's endangering us with a new ice age. It's being caused by industry, which is being driven by population growth and economic growth. Okay, they're out of control. They got to be put under control. Put us in control. Then in the 80s, the climate trend turned around. It started to warm. And they said, look, there's global warming. It's being driven by industry, which is being driven by population growth and economic growth. They're out of control. They got to be put under control. Put us in control. Okay, the problem changes. The solution is always the same. Put them in control. Global warming, the whole issue is not about weather. It's about power.
The main cause of regulation now is the excuse that we must either protect the environment or save the planet from climate change. This is now the main source of regulation worldwide, particularly in Western countries. Of course, China is not regulating itself, so it can't build fossil-fueled power stations as we are in Britain. In Britain, this year, we are closing 6 of Britain's largest power stations because they're powered by coal and they're a slightly old-fashioned design. Our European masters, whom we do not elect, it's a dictatorship, have ordered us to close those power stations. The British government, which no longer stands up for the British people, is going to close them. It has known for several years it was going to have to close them. It has made absolutely no provision to replace the electricity from those power stations with nuclear power or new coal-fired or gas-fired power stations.
So what's going to happen?
The lights will go out.
Environmental regulation can, like laws that restrict the use of carbon, cause freedom and prosperity to be reduced. When that happens, as I learned, life becomes more difficult for people all around the world. And it's not just about lights going out. This is a life and death issue.
Tell me about this chart here that you showed me when we walked in.
Everything we use is either made of carbon or made with carbon. Everything. This is per person income, average global income, okay, in dollars, $2010, adjusted for inflation, from 1800 to today. Graphed, however, against carbon consumption. This is one of the greatest stories ever told. This is humanity's escape from poverty. Billions of people escaping from poverty, enabled by increasing carbon consumption. And now you have people come along and say, we have to stop this. We want to stop the increase in carbon consumption. We want to stop this line from keep going up, which is exactly what it needs to do. Because while $9,000 a year average income is a great achievement, it's hardly enough. Okay, it's 1/5 of the average in the United States today, and we still have some poverty here. And half the world is below the average. This thing needs to go forward. And for someone to say, no, we want to stop it. We're fine as we are. Let the rest of them starve. We don't care. Or better yet, let's impose the Kyoto Treaty and reduce carbon consumption back to what it was in 1990, okay, when the world per capita income was $5,000 a year. Okay, that was fine. That's good enough for us. This is the most reactionary, cruel, brutal, heartless policy that anyone could possibly propose. Okay, the moral imperative of our generation is to continue this march forward. This thing's a miracle, and this is what the Greens want to stop.
American biofuels policy is estimated to cost about 192,000 excess premature deaths every year in developing countries. Our policy of not giving foreign aid to countries that use DDT in fighting malaria results in perhaps 1 to 2 million excess malaria deaths every year in developing countries.
On a global scale, there are people around the world who do in fact lose their lives because of green laws and environmentalism. Even in America, the green movement continues to cause many people to lose their jobs and their livelihoods. Living in Montana has exposed me to many environmental laws related to land use or endangered species that failed to provide solutions to the problems they were created to solve. One example of this is the destruction of the timber communities in the northwestern United States.
We had mining, we had wood processing facilities, and it was a vibrant economy. I mean, it was a great place to grow a family. And now, since the environmentalists came to help us and the federal government came to help us, things have gone to hell in a handbasket.
The destruction of just the wood products industry alone in Montana has probably resulted in something on the order of a loss of 50,000 jobs in Montana. And that is a huge impact on a state that has 900,000 people in it.
Drug abuse is on the rise, elder abuse, spousal abuse, alcohol abuse.
Has it always been this way in this area?
No, it hasn't. Used to have 10 mills, churches, schools, people lived and worked, their children got jobs. There used to be 22 mills in Siskiyou County.
And what happened?
The green movement, the spotted owl happened. The green movement used the spotted owl to reduce logging to almost zero.
They were thriving timber communities and it was all national forest lands. When they came in with the spotted owl and just really tied up and hamstrung the whole industry. And I've just watched in 20 years those communities just die. It's sad.
Lumber was the #1 industry in Humboldt County, and now it's marijuana. Groups like Earth First and Greenpeace, they send up kids, and they chain themselves to the logging trucks and they sit in the trees.
They have made our environment worse. Our socioeconomic environment is absolute disaster. Talk to the jailer at the Lincoln County jailhouse and she'll tell you what's causing this. It's lack of employment.
In the case of these communities, the biggest factor determining the quality of life was the timber industry, which was shut down by environmentalists who claimed that logging was threatening the habitat of northern spotted owls, a bird of much controversy over the last few decades.
We have all the trees in the world. We have millions upon millions of acres of trees. The environmentalists have already shut that down over an owl, by the way. And if they were correct, well, we should have owls coming out of our ears, right? But the owl population continues to crash in spite of the fact that there is no logging anymore. Well, if it wasn't logging that killed the owl, what was it?
The regulation that comes out to protect owls protects their habitat to the point of trying to densify everything beyond what it could have been. So you're trying to prevent any kind of disturbance in the upland. Well, that's not reality for this ecosystem.
He's got a 6-foot wingspan. He needs to be able to fly to the forest floor to eat the only food he eats, a wood rat, a dusty-footed wood rat, a pack rat. Well, now there are so many trees, the owl can't reach the forest floor with his wings spread, so they leave or they die.
Do the environmental groups and activists understand this? I mean, are they clueless or what's going on here?
Quite frankly, most of them that I've had the opportunity to work with are lawyers. I have yet to work with one that was professionally trained in natural resources, so it's all anecdotally. What they see is their reality. What they may read in the newspaper becomes their science.
You see the natural resource, the abundant natural resource that it is, and the availability of it, and that proper management and stewardship would not only create healthy forests, healthy communities, but yet we tie it all up, we tear the roads out, and we shut it off, and the forests are rotting away, decaying away, the communities are decaying away, and what benefit is there in the whole thing?
So they really don't have any idea what's going on here?
Well, I think they do, but I have to tell you, there's a very big difference between ecology and environmentalism. Ecology uses science. Environmentalism is a fusion of science and philosophy. So I am an ecologist who know how to manage this and manage it within natural parameters, but I'm not an environmentalist.
So there's really not much left of the timber industry anymore?
Not much left of the timber industry, and there'll be less so because they're expanding the critical habitat of the northern spotted owl. I've been working on these issues for over 20 years, and I've seen the different initiatives that have gone forward and the regulations that have gone forward, and it pretty much we're small family farms and ranches here, and it just can't survive under the burden.
The burden of the regulations?
The burden of the regulations.
The bulk of our children have moved away from this county. There are no jobs in this county. This county, the official unemployment rate, I believe, is somewhere around 23%. The unofficial, according to the Sheriff's Department, is somewhere around 35.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And this used to be one of the most prosperous counties.
This county was
in California.
This county had the highest timber receipt revenue of any county in the state.
There are people today in rural America who are concerned about the future of their property rights. Among the many green initiatives targeted at them these days, in the Pacific Northwest, we see that one of the biggest threats lies with the environmentalists pushing to demolish the dams. Dams provide them with clean, cheap energy, and more importantly, with water.
We're removing dams across the United States. Bruce Babbitt just recently said we need to consider removing over 75,000 dams across the United States. Now, for the green movement, a lot of dams are hydroelectric dams, and people say that it's because of the fish that we need to remove dams. Well, we build ladders. We build fish ladders. We could put a fish bypass tunnel.
I mean, so if the fish aren't really in danger, why do the environmentalists want to blow up the dams?
Money. I mean, this is easy. The Klamath dams, for example, there's about $2 billion riding on getting those dams out. Who's going to get that money?
Yeah, wait, they get money for taking the dams out?
Oh, you betcha. They're projects. You know, they can do some projects when they take those dams out. First of all, the dam removal is worth about $1.1 billion over 20 years. Next, the restoration, the quote, restoration projects to renew and enhance the environment. Those are worth another $1 billion. Who's going to get that money? Nature Conservancy, Cal Trout, Rivers Wild, River Keepers, the Karuk tribe, the Yuroks, the Hoopas, all of the people who want the dams out stand to gain the money. And the only people who are going to get thrown under the bus are the taxpayers, the property owners, the water right owners, and the people who receive the power.
I had a friend tell me about the dams, that they wanted to remove the dams here. And that's actually why I got involved in stuff, because I sold my home in Clayton and took all my money and bought a home up here. And this home up here is going to finance me when I have to go into a convalescent home if I live that long. And so when I found out the dams were going to come out, that was threatening my investment up here. So basically I got involved out of selfish reasons to protect my investment, because if the dams came out, that would make my property worth nothing.
What's the only dam they don't want to remove? Well, that's the dam that supplies the electricity to the people who want the rest of the dams out. Isn't that odd?
I love the people up here, and the women up here are strong and independent. It's a great place to live, and it just makes me so angry. I'm going to get emotional, but it just makes me darn mad of what's going on to the people up here, and I'll be darned if I'm going to sit and garden and do genealogy and not do anything to stop it.
My wife and I own a small town radio station. We're also ranchers, and we raise livestock. So this is very important to us because we're trying to protect our livelihood. We're trying to protect this community from economic collapse. These forests now carry 10 times the typical number of trees they carry, which means a lot of transpiration, sublimation. There's no water left in the river because the trees drink it all on the way down the watershed.
You guys have pine beetles here yet?
We have pine beetles here. We have catastrophic wildfire, which puts a lot of silt and junk in the river so that the fish die, and then they blame the fish dying on the ranchers.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So it isn't. It's an agenda, and it's very carefully crafted.
You think it's part of Agenda 21? You think
Absolutely,
that's real?
Positively.
A lot of people hear Agenda 21, they think big conspiracy. But you're saying part of shutting down the economic development, the natural resources, which is destroying this community. But you're saying that's planned. That's the end game.
When I ask myself, do all of these agencies and all of these NGOs sit down every Thursday and have a conference call about how to further Agenda 21? No, I can't think that's true. But whenever their agendas march in parallel, they certainly cooperate. They all know one another. They're all buddies. At the end of these meetings, we watch them all. You have the property owners, taxpayers, and water right owners on one side of the table worrying about how they're going to pay their bills next year. And then you have all of these NGOs, the quote stakeholders, and when the meetings are over, they all go to their cars laughing and talking, shaking hands, and they talk about, well, where do you guys want to go eat dinner tonight? And we're all going, how are we going to be here to eat dinner tomorrow night?
Since I began making this film, I've heard a lot about what's known as Agenda 21. But what exactly is it, and why should we be concerned about it?
I rise in strong support of H-Con Res 353, expressing the sense of the Congress that the United States should assume a strong leadership role in implementing the decisions made at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, and developing a national strategy to implement Agenda 21.
Agenda 21 is a real document of 365 pages and 40 chapters produced by UN bureaucrats in 1992 for the Rio Earth Summit and adopted by the 190-odd nations who were present at that summit. Nobody is saying that Agenda 21, which is a regime of extreme environmental restriction on the most absurd bases, should be applied in third world countries. This is an anti-Western measure targeted as a dagger at the heart of the West.
The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21, for global environmental action.
The goal is, under Agenda 21, in writing, this is not conspiracy theory, this is a conspiratorial fact. The objectives under Agenda 21 are to reduce human population by 85%. So how do you reduce human population by 85%? Well, the cleanest and easiest way is to take the resources of the earth and put them off limits to human beings. If we're unable to get our resources from places like Montana or places like California, you'll find that simply the world won't support as many people as there are.
Now, they would like to do that fairly rapidly, and they adopt all sorts of policies that, in fact, lead to a lot of human deaths, such as banning DDT use. 2 million people die of malaria every year because of that, and hundreds of millions get terrible malaria cases that keep them from working and progressing and so on.
It's called Rescue Mission, a children's edition of Agenda 21, and it shows you the most amazing propaganda. This is one of the most remarkable pages. It shows all these little children
the baby bomb.
Coming down with storks, and it's called the baby bomb. And you see, here's God looking so puzzled. He never intended for all these babies to be born. And then this is the most amazing statement: the planet groans every time it registers another birth. So part of Agenda 21 is, of course, to tell our children that the earth is so overpopulated, and for them to even contemplate having another child is just terrible.
The United Nations and many governments around the world are claiming that the Earth is overpopulated. Many major environmental organizations are saying the same thing, like the Center for Biological Diversity and the World Wildlife Fund. But are we really in danger of overpopulation?
The reality is that even just simply the decline in fertility rates, because people are afraid of overpopulation, because governments promote family planning and often through coercive means, such as China's one-child policy. Because of this, the majority of the world's leading demographers now predict that by somewhere around 2050 to 2060, the world's population will peak. After that, it will begin to decline precipitously, so that it is entirely plausible that we would hit the 500 million. In fact, we would hit 300 million as total world population around the year 2300. That's 290 years from now. And the disruptions that will occur because of that are immense.
Population is bad, they say. The Earth groans every time it registers a new birth. That's what they say. And you're saying we need more
The world
people.
needs more people. The world needs more people. Because people are not just consumers. People are producers. And not is it merely true that every mouth comes with a pair of hands. If that was all there was to it, then human well-being would be neutral with regard to population. It wouldn't increase or decrease. But every mouth comes with a brain. And the more people there are, the more inventors there are. So the faster the rate of technological innovation. Furthermore, you have a larger division of labor, which makes it easier to produce things. And you have a larger market, which makes it much easier to invest, because you have a larger market to sell to. So to invest in everything from R&D to new factories to new transportation infrastructure. And this is why, as the world's population has gone up, living standards has gone up. And not just in this century or the preceding century, but through all of human history. Okay, and we live much better today, not only because of all the people that are alive today, but because of all the people that have lived in the past. I mean, just imagine that if Malthus had been listened to and his ideas had been enforced as policy effectively, so there have been half as many people in the world in the 1800s as there actually were. Well, you could get rid of either Thomas Edison or Louis Pasteur. Take your pick.
Instead of our being afraid of overpopulation, what we should be afraid of is underpopulation. Russia is losing about 1 million people a year right now. Western Europe is losing about 900,000 people a year right now.
Tell me why you think we're not in danger of running out of resources, because the more people, you know, the saying goes, the more resources we're going to use. We don't have enough resources to go around. They're finite, so therefore we should limit population, we should limit development.
Our resources are not running out. Our resources are becoming more plentiful. You go into an antique store here, you look at the stuff that the pioneers of the West owned, it's all made of either carbon steel, glass, wood, or leather. That is the material resources of that society. In 120 years, we've gone to a whole new array of resources. I mean, most of those people never saw a piece of aluminum, let alone plastic or fiberglass. Yet aluminum is the second most common element in the Earth's crust. Silicon is the most common element in the Earth's crust.
Price functions in economics as a measure of scarcity. The more scarce something is, the higher its price is. The less scarce it is, the lower its price is. For every extractive resource, the long-term price trend, and there are ups and downs in between, but the long-term price trend is sharply downward. Now that downward price trend is a clear economic signal that the resources, mineral, plant, animal, are more abundant now than they were before, even though we've used some up. We've used far more oil than the entire known world reserves of 1940. But the entire known world reserves today are far greater than they've been at any time in history.
But what if we run out of oil?
We never will run out of oil. That's because if actual quantities of oil out there in the earth become small enough, the price of extracting it and using it will become so high that nobody will bother with it anymore. Why aren't we worried now about running out of whale oil? In the late 19th century, people were worried about running out of whale oil. We're not worried about it because as its price rose, while the whale population dwindled, that sent a signal economically. There's money to be made by providing substitutes for whale oil. And Thomas Edison went to work, and after 900 and some experiments, he perfected the incandescent light bulb, and that gave us a way to use electricity to make light instead of whale oil. Demand for whale oil plummeted around the world. Bingo, the whale populations came back. Similarly, if we ever reach that point where we're running out of oil, the price will rise so high that it will push us to use other things as a substitute. And historically, we keep discovering that the new substitutes are cheaper than the old ones.
Hydrogen is the most common element in the ocean. Okay? Once we develop controlled fusion, hydrogen will represent a huge energy resources. A single gallon of seawater would have as much energy as 350 gallons of gasoline. Okay, these resources are phenomenal, and they are unlocked by human creativity.
And so it's against those who are the control freaks on the one hand, and those who are the freedom lovers and democracy lovers on the other. That's the fundamental divide in politics, and it always has been. We now see it in a particularly poisonous form because modern methods of communication have enabled the totalitarians for the first time successfully to organize themselves on a global scale. And totalitarianism is, of course, this desire by the governing class to control absolutely every aspect of everybody's life and whether indeed they're allowed to live or die, down to the last dismal, dim, flickering, poison-filled light bulb.
In most of the places where you have severe poverty, they also have socialism or communism. This is a failed experiment that the United Nations would like to impose upon us, and it has failed every place on earth that it's ever been tried, and tens of millions of people have suffered and died under socialist or communistic governance procedures. And now that's happening here. And look at the result. Lincoln County destitute, Siskiyou County destitute. We have all the wealth in the world, and we're not allowed to touch it. We're not allowed to use the wealth that our own property produces. And here's the thing for Protect Our Water and the people here. We will fight to protect our property. We will not go quietly. We go into these meetings and we tell the people from Fish and Wildlife and California Department of Fish and Game to pound sand. We will not get their permits. We will not submit. And if it comes to it, we will fight to protect our property.
What else can you do?
Well, personally, I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And the Constitution gives me the right to do so.
Right now, with all of the environmental regulations, and I live in a beautiful place, this is where I found out what they were doing.
Nina Pellegrini is a Cuban refugee who lived under communism. She has devoted her life to warning people on the dangers of communism and on the loss of freedom and liberty in this country.
And it wasn't until I realized that they were doing the same things that I experienced in Cuba. And that's what woke me up.
And this is the parallel between totalitarianism and environmentalism. Because environmentalism treats nature as all and man as nothing.
Listen to what I'm saying. I don't want you to go through the deprivation of freedom, because it's not an easy thing. It's painful. And once you lose it, it's very hard to regain it. And it's such a precious thing.
You don't have to make somebody do something. All you have to do is make the suggestion strong enough, and they're going to do it on their own. And you know, Joe Stalin and Nikita Khrushchev are rolling over in their grave because we've done to ourselves in 20 years what they couldn't do in 100.
Communism failed. Marxism failed in its economic sense. But all those enemies of those traditional systems are still out there. And so now what they're doing, instead of speaking on behalf of the worker, they're saying, now we speak on behalf of the planet. We speak on behalf of natural resources.
When you drive up the price of energy by switching from conventional fuels to so-called green fuels, you drive up the price of everything else. You destroy employment because businesses have to lay off workers in order to cut costs. So you cut employment, which means you cut people's wages, and at the same time you increase their cost of living because energy goes into everything that they do. So consequently, people are hurt, and from our perspective with the Cornwall Alliance, where we're so concerned about the impact of these things on the poor, the people who get hurt the worst are the poor.
This is a movement which is, at best, flagrantly narcissistic and acting without regard to the welfare of the world's poor, and arguably and demonstrably at times in places aggressively seeking to brutalize, harm, enslave, or exterminate the world's poor. I mean, just think about this. Carbon taxes. What could be more regressive than carbon taxes? Carbon is the main component of food and fuel, okay? Carbon taxes are more regressive even than sales taxes, because with a sales tax, a high fashion dress, which costs more than a discount dress, gets taxed more. But they both use the same amount of carbon. So under the carbon tax, the full weight of taxation falls on the poor.
What you've now got is an environment-destroying program in the name of protecting the environment. It's a very, very strange, very, very unsatisfactory thing. Indeed, it follows Monckton's law. Monckton's law says that when the state chooses to intervene, particularly in the economic sphere, its intervention will be more likely than not to achieve precisely the opposite of the result which was, however piously, intended. Not just unforeseen consequences, but foreseeable consequences that are the opposite of what was intended. And the laws that are now being passed in the West to protect the environment are, as you have seen with the introduction of the subarctic wolf, leading to its outright destruction. Yeah. But nobody dares say anything because the small clique of communists driving this is so vicious to anyone that argues with them. You have had this yourself. I've had it. This is what goes on. But we have to face communism down. We have to say, no, we are not going to introduce the Communist International in the name of saving a planet that doesn't need to be saved. We must get back to doing the science and the economics.
No matter what games they play with trying to refine fascism or socialism, that without the principle of economics adopted by America based on private property and free enterprise, that nothing's going to work.
What we need what the Constitution guarantees us, and that is a bottom-up system of government, where local communities make decisions for themselves based upon their property rights and their legal rights, and then we are responsible for the consequences of our decisions. That's why private property works, because if I'm irresponsible with my stuff and my property, I'm the only one that suffers. But when you have a regional governance, when you have a socialistic form of government, you place everyone's assets under the control of a few. And those people are capable of greed and self-interest and selfishness and corruption, and you see a tremendous amount of that in the green movement, in the wolf, in the spotted owl, and the coho salmon. This is greed and corruption run amok. Scientific misconduct, junk science, poor accounting, outright theft, like the Yurok biologists. They forged all the spotted owl surveys and stole $1 million from the tribe in the process. That's what happens under socialism.
The socialistic and communistic roots of the Green Movement are undeniable. But I wanted to take a look at a deeper level, the philosophical.
Culture is externalization of what is inside us, the ideas, the beliefs, the values, the traditions.
I met up with a renowned author and cultural analyst, Vishal Mangalwadi. Born and raised in India, he was once arrested and put in prison for trying to help the poor help themselves. He has spoken on the environment numerous times, and his background gives him an unparalleled ability to compare and contrast different cultures and the ideas that separate them from one another.
The ideas on which America was founded were very peculiar ideas. Once you reject the basis for those ideas, which was the Bible, then you can't sustain the kind of society you have had. So you have to destroy everything because the progress of the West was fruit. The root was the Bible. And what you've done is rejected the roots. The fruit have to dry up.
You know, people just need to be wary of how all of this fits together and dig down to an understanding of what's going to make America work again and what's going to allow humanity to begin to thrive once more. And what we have to really understand is that about the Agenda 21 assault, the real goal of the internationalists is the takedown of America. It's the takedown of the American ideal that we each own ourselves, that our lives are free and that we're not bound by the kinds of limitations that we're feeling these days. And if America can be succumbed, then the whole world will fall.
Our government has exploded in size with bureaucrats who are micromanaging things that should be left to the free market. So if we could shrink that down and get it back to a more original design where free men who have personal liberty can manage their affairs according to their own best interests, which are also the interests of the community, then everyone benefits. And so especially those who work the land, who take care of the land, from the farmer to the miner to the foresters, they have to be given, and their freedom must be returned to them, to manage their affairs the way they know is best, because they are wiser than any bureaucrat.
We're not stupid here. I mean, we're better stewards of this land than anybody from Cornell University who's never seen it. Half of the policy decisions the U.S. Forest Service makes don't come from here. They come from Washington, D.C., and they're based upon forests that are nothing like our forest.
And so nothing that we say says that we must treat the environment just like our garbage can. We do have to look after it, but we don't have to extinguish 9/10 of humanity or more in the name of doing that.
We are created to establish our dominion over nature, which means transcending nature in our minds first and then imposing the fruits of our imagination upon nature.
We should at least be managing within an ecological balance, which we're not. We're managing within a preservation stance. And that doesn't do any good for the wildlife, doesn't do any good for mankind either.
The further you get away from community involvement, the more mismanaged it becomes. And if you can keep it at a state level, if states can manage their own timber, our Department of Natural Resources does a pretty good job of managing timberland, and the rules and regulations to protect wetlands, to protect streams and creeks and rivers, and they're always assessing that. They're always trying to make sure that they're managing the resources properly. But you get to the federal level, and then all of a sudden you could see it's no longer the resources that are the priority. And, you know, as you're aware of, there's a bigger agenda.
Liberty works. Freedom works. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of property is what our founders gave their lives for.
And we can do it, whatever it is. Not just economic development, but economic development in the sense that we maintain some wilderness or backcountry, primitive areas, these kinds of things for us to enjoy, because that's one reason we're here.
In the West, you were successful economically because you were learning management. If I'm created to manage, how do I manage? How do I govern? What are the best and the most efficient and most productive ways?
The most important purpose of government is not to restrict freedom, but to protect it at all costs, because it is through freedom that we are able to create.
It won't be just Australia, it won't be just California. It will be the West as a whole that rapidly becomes, as Europe already has, an insignificant, economically collapsing backwater where nobody would dream of doing any business. And so we are killing the goose that laid the golden egg.
We're protecting things to death.
Protecting things to death.
Yeah. I mean, it's not good to be in the forest and become warm and fuzzy, you know.
Most environmentalists assume that the world as it was first made, or as we happen to find it, is maximal, that that's the best. That's not true. And in fact, even decent ecologists know that that's not true. There is no such thing as ecological equilibrium. And we don't have a responsibility to try to sustain ecological equilibrium or nature best untouched by human hands. That's not the point. Our task is to reflect God by enhancing the beauty, the fruitfulness, and the safety of the earth to the glory of God and to the benefit of our neighbors.
Don't we all want a flourishing world to live in? Don't we all want to see humanity thrive? Don't we all want to be free? In the end, I discovered that not only can these things go together, but they need each other. We can have a good environment, but we can't have one without freedom and prosperity. Environmentalism and the Green Movement consistently compromise on all of these issues. It's time to axe the Green Movement and replace it with something better.
The old saying goes, you can't beat something with nothing. So instead of just saying anti-green, it's bad. And it's not all bad. You know, the concepts of being good stewards is a good thing. But what about creating a new identity that encompasses all of these ideals and calling it blue instead of green?
Like the sky or
blue
the
like
ocean.
the sky, to create a positive identity for what we believe in. Beautify the earth. We all want clean water. We all want clean air. We all want healthy environments to live in. L
liberate man. Freedom and private property rights. Liberation. You utilize our resources wisely for the benefit of mankind and for the benefit of the environment that we live in, and E, enjoy it.
Sounds good to me.
Very good. Wonderful. Let's do it.